Professor Sandel, what a pleasure to have a reunion after years.
Yes, it's great to be with you again. Yeah.
I've seen you're very productive in bringing different opinions together. I mean, you've been studying politics from perspective of ethics and also philosophy. Let me ask you, recently we see so-called debates about artificially designed the so-called ideological divide in our world. How do you, as a professor, see these kind of debates?
I think we need to get beyond the rhetoric and have real dialogue.
What is rhetoric? What is real dialogue to you?
Well, what real dialogue is to me is bringing people together, especially young people, the rising generation, university students, from different countries, from different backgrounds, to reason together, to discuss together big ethical questions that matter. We've done some experiments with this recently with NHK, where we brought together groups of students from China, Japan, and the United States.
Interesting crowd.
Some of my students at Harvard, some students from Fudan University, in some of the programs from China-U.S.
Yeah.
We brought them together to discuss controversial ethical questions, but in a serious way.
Like what?
Well, not hurling rhetoric. For example, we did one program on gender equality and inequality, and all of the issues and debates around gender inequality. We did another program on the intense competition for admission to top universities, to score well on exams, the emphasis on cram courses, and the advantages enjoyed by those from well-off families who can provide those resources, and how do they compare the experiences they've had with those of their colleagues. We did one on democracy. What does democracy really mean? And it was interesting. The students from Japan and China and the United States had different views, but they were listening to one another and responding to one another in ways that went well beyond ideology and rhetoric.
That's very important, because sometimes these are just ideological narratives without real discussion. But how do you see, culture where these students are coming from actually play a role in their concept of understanding all these abstract concepts?
Right. I think there is, and you mentioned, a kind of ideological hardening of positions if we look at the headlines or if we watch cable news channels. But I think when it comes to actually discussing these issues in a serious way, especially with university-age students, there is a great hunger, I think, in all of our countries, in all of our societies, for a better kind of public discourse, a better kind of dialogue that goes deeper, that listens to those who come from different backgrounds and tries to work out what those differences amount to. And oftentimes there are disagreements within the groups of students from particular countries and surprising areas of agreement across the different countries. But we can't know until we try.
So what you're saying, no matter what the topic is, even it could be so-called ideological divide.
Right.
We need to sit down and talk to one another.
Yes.
So the most important thing is not talk, but also listen.
Yes. Listening is one of the most important civic arts, the art of listening. It's more than just hearing the words that another person
What
speaks.
is it about then?
Well, what it's about is listening attentively to try to figure out the principles, the moral convictions lying behind the position or the argument that a person makes, especially if that's someone with whom we disagree. Sympathetic listening is, I think, a lost civic art, and we need to revive it. We need to revive it in very concrete conversations. And we've done these experiments, which have been broadcast, and some of them available online, as a way of showing there is a better way of engaging in dialogue.
But 2024, of course, is a tumultuous year, Professor. Many elections going on in the world, including election in your home country, the United States. But we don't see these days in the political debates much content related to what you have just said. Pretty much political narratives and rhetorics.
Yes.
So what's going on with our politics?
Well, we live in polarized times. The polarization we find between countries in the geopolitical competition that you've described, and that's been heating up and hardening in some ways. We also find the polarization, certainly we do in the United States, within our politics, within our society, as we see the current presidential primaries unfolding on the Republican side. And so the question is, have people already made up their minds what they think? Or is there room for some coming together, some reasoning together, reasoning about our differences and disagreements, taking seriously one another, showing civility and mutual respect, because these are conditions, and the listening we were talking about can produce a kind of mutual respect that is often missing from the hardened, contentious, polarized debates.
Is the second choice still available?
The second choice, meaning reasoned dialogue based on mutual respect.
Is it still possible?
I think it still is possible.
What is pointing to that optimism?
Well, here I would distinguish, Tian, between optimism and hope. It's very hard to be optimistic these days in the face of the intense divisions and polarizations that we see on the world stage and within societies.
Right.
But I do have hope that we can build genuine dialogue, that we can recover the art of listening if we set about it. And what gives me the hope is not listening to the elites or to the political leaders or the politicians or the political parties, because they're stuck, I think, in these...
Their own cocoons.
I think so. But what does give me hope is listening to young people, the younger generation. There is a hunger for something better, something deeper. What I've tried to do is to seize that opportunity, to engage young people in dialogue, in large settings and in small settings, to see if we can begin to build mutual understanding.
Professor Sandel, you were one of the early birds, if I could use that word to describe you, for warning people about the issue of justice. And now, years later, look at what we have, divide and also gap. Now, how do you see the discussion about justice still relevant today? Can that really happen?
Well, I think what's happened since we first began these discussions is that the divide between so-called winners and losers has been deepening.
Absolutely.
And the gap, it has partly to do with the growing gap of income and wealth between rich and poor. But now it's in some ways made even worse by the fact that there have been changing attitudes towards success that have accompanied the widening inequalities. Those who've landed on top have come to believe that their success is their own doing, proof of their merit. It's a kind of hubris, and that those who struggle must deserve their fate too. Maybe they just don't work hard enough. But the system of globalization that's been played out over the last 4 decades has reinforced and contributed to the widening gaps of income and wealth. So I think we need to have a serious debate both about the shape of the economy and about the attitudes towards success by which we interpret the places we land. We need to have a serious discussion about the ethical issues, including issues not only of who should get what, but also questions of hubris and humility. I think one of the reasons we just saw the entrenched positions in the American election, one of the reasons so many Americans are drawn to Donald Trump, regardless of criminal charges against him, is they feel that he stands up to the elites who look down on them. Many working people feel that. And when working people feel looked down upon by elites, when they feel that the work they do is not respected, that it lacks dignity, that adds to the sense of anger and resentment and grievance. So I think we need to broaden the debate to include questions of hubris and humility, questions of anger and resentment, and how are they connected to the widening inequalities as well as to the attitudes of elites toward those less fortunate than themselves.
Since you already mentioned virtues, let me continue on that path just a little bit. Now, you've been doing research about meritocracy. As you know, it has a lot to do with people's concepts of virtues. For example, with Confucianism. That's just one of those many examples in the world. So tell me more about how meritocracy, the latest version, when you are researching and discussing with relevant parties.
Well, my recent book is on meritocracy. The Tyranny of Merit is the book. And it's paradoxical to speak of merit as a kind of tyranny, because normally we think of merit as a good thing. If I need a surgeon, I want a well-qualified surgeon to perform it. That's merit. Merit is good in that sense. But merit's become a kind of tyranny because of this tendency of elites to look down. Now, traditionally, meritocracy, going back to Confucius, and also in the West to Plato and Aristotle, the idea that those who govern should have merit meant that they should have virtue, that they should have character, that they should set a moral example. So meritocracy in governing was connected to virtue. Today, when we talk about meritocracy, very often it's detached from any notion of virtue. The idea is that heads of companies, or for that matter of political parties and governments, that they need technocratic merit, expertise. Now, technocratic expertise is important, but it's not the whole of merit, because unless it's connected to a concern for the common good, unless it's connected to the idea of cultivating virtue among citizens and also among leaders, then meritocracy loses its moral core, its moral heart. So one of my arguments in the tyranny of merit is that we need to reconnect the idea of merit to the idea of virtue, moral character, and the common good.
As we know, at this moment, we still do not know how AI actually works, including those that are working on AI today. We hope it will go with the morality and also ethics that we all accept, but we don't know. How do you see the issue of artificial intelligence and the ethics behind it?
If we leave the development of artificial intelligence entirely to big companies, they will think the natural purpose of artificial intelligence is cost saving to increase profits and eliminating labor. But I think that's not the direction that will produce the greatest public good.
But they argue that's not their purpose. They argue their purpose is really serving the mankind by providing better technologies and more options.
Well, the question is what counts as a better technology? And that's something that we need to debate. That should be a public debate. That should not be decided just in Silicon Valley or in tech centers around the world.
But literacy about the technologies is very rare these days still. So how would you have a debate without having sufficient literacy about the technology?
The debate can be and should be about the direction of AI, about the purposes it serves. For example, should we invest in AI to eliminate labor, or should we invest in forms of AI that can enhance labor, make labor more productive, so that workers will, instead of having their jobs taken away by robots, will be more productive and therefore can share in the benefits of the productivity growth that can result. But for this to happen, we have to have a public discussion about the direction of AI so that it can enhance labor.
Professor Sandel, always enticing a conversation with you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tian.
Looking forward to your coming to China.
Yes, in April. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.